The thunderstorm raged outside as Penelope Kincaid huddled beneath the shelter of the old station house, wondering if she'd made a terrible mistake in leaving Boston for the untamed Wyoming Territory of 1876. The rain hammered against the roof, a relentless drumming that matched the pounding of her heart. 3 weeks on a westbound train had brought her to this moment alone, frightened and questioning everything. "Miss, you'll be wanting to come inside before you catch your death," called a weathered voice from the doorway. The station master gestured hurriedly. "Stage won't be running till morning now, not in this weather." Penelope gathered her skirts and stepped into the dimly lit building, her eyes adjusting to the lamplight. Only 2 other travelers waited inside, an elderly woman knitting furiously in the corner, and a broad-shouldered man slumped against the far wall, hat pulled low over his face. "Where might a lady find lodging for the night?" Penelope asked, trying to keep her voice steady despite her nerves. The station master pointed vaguely toward a window where lightning flashed. "Riverbank Hotel, 'bout half a mile that away. Nothing fancy, but clean enough." Penelope thanked him and settled onto a bench, contemplating the walk through the deluge. She'd come west to take a position as schoolteacher, drawn by the promise of independence and adventure. Now, as thunder cracked overhead, both seemed considerably less appealing. Hours passed. The elderly woman eventually departed with a relative who arrived by wagon. The station master retreated to his quarters. Only Penelope and the silent man remained as the storm gradually eased to a gentle patter. When the man finally shifted, she noticed him struggling with something in his lap. Curiosity overtook her caution. Moving closer, she saw he was attempting to mend a tear in his shirt sleeve, the needle trembling violently in his large, calloused hands. Blood spotted the fabric where he'd pricked himself repeatedly. "You're making quite a mess of that," she said before she could stop herself. He looked up, and Penelope caught her breath. Despite the exhaustion lining his face, his eyes were a startling blue beneath the shadow of his hat brim. He couldn't have been more than 30, with several days' worth of stubble darkening his jaw. "Not much choice," he replied, his voice rough but not unkind. "It's my only good shirt." Penelope hesitated only briefly before crossing the room. "May I?" she asked, extending her hand. Relief washed over his features as he surrendered the needle. "Much obliged, madam." She settled beside him, careful to maintain a proper distance. "I'm Penelope Kincaid, the new teacher for Prosperity Creek." "Preston Archer," he replied. "Rancher, from just outside Prosperity as it happens." Penelope's fingers worked deftly, repairing the torn seam with tiny, even stitches. "What brings you to the station on such a dreadful night, Mr. Archer?" "Coming back from Cheyenne," he said. "Business." "You're a long way from home yourself, I'd wager." "Boston," she confirmed. "And yes, it does feel very far away at present." Preston studied her with unexpected intensity. "Teaching position, you said. The children will be fortunate to have a proper education." Something in his tone made her glance up. "You sound as though you value education highly, Mr. Archer." "Didn't get much of one myself," he shrugged. "Can read and cipher well enough to run my spread, but I know the difference it makes." As she tied off the thread, Penelope noticed a leather-bound book protruding from his saddlebag. "Thoreau?" she asked, surprised. A flush crept up his neck. "Try to improve my mind when I can." The discovery softened something within her. This weathered cowboy with his philosophical leanings was not what she'd expected to find in Wyoming Territory. "There," she said, handing back the mended shirt. "Good as new." Their fingers brushed briefly in the exchange. Even that fleeting touch sent an unexpected warmth through her tired body. "I'm in your debt, Miss Kincaid." His eyes held hers a moment too long. "Will you be staying in town tonight?" "If I can reach the Riverbank Hotel without drowning." She attempted humor to mask her sudden nervousness. Preston stood, towering above her. "I've got my wagon outside. Rain's let up enough. I'd be honored to see you safely there." Propriety demanded she decline. A strange man, an unchaperoned ride. It was scandalous by Boston standards. But she was no longer in Boston, and the alternative was a muddy walk in the dark. "Thank you, Mr. Archer. I accept." The night air smelled of rain-soaked earth and pine as Preston helped her into his wagon. Lightning still flickered on the distant horizon, but overhead, stars had begun to emerge from behind thinning clouds. "Been teaching long?" he asked as they set off, the wagon wheels splashing through puddles. "This will be my first position," Penelope admitted. "I was a teaching assistant at a girls' school in Boston previously." "What made you choose Prosperity Creek? We're hardly on any maps." Penelope hesitated, unsure how much to reveal. "I wanted somewhere different, somewhere I could make a real difference." She didn't mention the broken engagement, the whispers that followed her, the need to escape. Preston nodded as though he understood more than she'd said. "Folks here need someone who cares about education. Previous teacher left after one winter. Claimed civilization was preferable to our company." "And is it so uncivilized?" she asked, suddenly worried. His laugh was unexpected and rich. "We've got our rough edges, sure enough, but there's good people here, hardworking, honest mostly." When they reached the hotel, Preston insisted on carrying her trunk inside. The elderly proprietor raised her eyebrows at their late arrival but offered no comment as she led Penelope to a small but clean room. "School term starts Monday," Preston said as he set down her trunk. "If you'd allow it, I could show you around town tomorrow, help you get settled." Penelope knew she should politely decline. Yet something about Preston Archer, perhaps the gentle way he'd spoken of the town, or how carefully he'd helped her navigate the muddy street, made her nod. "I would appreciate that very much, Mr. Archer." "Preston," he corrected. "Folks here use first names more freely than back east." "Then thank you, Preston." The name felt intimate on her tongue. "Until tomorrow." After he left, Penelope sat on the edge of the narrow bed, fingers absently tracing the worn quilt. She'd expected loneliness on this journey, not this strange connection with a blue-eyed rancher who read Thoreau and couldn't sew a straight stitch. Perhaps Wyoming would surprise her after all. Morning brought clear skies and golden sunlight streaming through Penelope's window. After breakfast in the hotel's modest dining room, she found Preston waiting outside, his wagon freshly cleaned, his appearance considerably more polished than the previous evening. He'd shaved, and the mended shirt was crisp beneath a well-worn leather vest. "You look rested, Miss Kincaid," he said, helping her into the wagon. "Penelope, please," she replied. "If we're to observe local customs." His smile transformed his face, erasing years of weathering. "Penelope it is, then." Prosperity Creek proved larger than she'd anticipated, a proper main street, lined with wooden buildings, including a general store, 2 saloons, a bank, and even a small newspaper office. Children played in the muddy street while women in practical calico dresses went about their shopping. "There's your schoolhouse," Preston said, pointing to a whitewashed building set slightly apart from the others. "It's not much, but the town raised money for new books last year." Pride colored his voice, making Penelope wonder about his connection to the school. As though reading her thoughts, he added, "My younger sister teaches occasionally when there's no regular teacher. She'll be glad for the break." The schoolhouse was simple but sturdy, with rows of rough-hewn benches and a pot-bellied stove in the corner. A small shelf held perhaps 24 books, treasures in this frontier town. "How many pupils will I have?" she asked, running her fingers along the teacher's desk. 28 at last count, ages 6 to 16. Some only come when farm work allows. Penelope nodded, already planning lessons in her mind. And my accommodations? There's a small room attached to the back, Preston explained, leading her through a door behind the desk. The teacher's quarters consisted of a narrow bed, a dresser, a desk, and a tiny cooking area. It's modest but private. The town council will provide firewood and basic supplies. Throughout the day, Preston introduced her to shopkeepers and townspeople. Most greeted her warmly, though she noted a few suspicious glances from older women. "Don't mind Mrs. Hollister," Preston murmured after a particularly frosty encounter. She wanted her niece to get the teaching position. By late afternoon, Penelope's head swam with new names and faces. Preston seemed to notice her fatigue and suggested they take a break. "There's a nice spot by the creek," he offered. "Might be a good place to clear your head before meeting more folks." The creek that gave the town its name curved gently through a stand of cottonwoods just beyond the main settlement. Preston spread a blanket on the grassy bank and produced a simple picnic of bread, cheese, and apples from his saddlebag. "This is lovely," Penelope said, breathing deeply of the fresh air. "I hadn't expected such beauty here." Preston watched her with an expression she couldn't quite interpret. "What did you expect? Dust, lawlessness, crude people." She blushed at her own honesty. "I'm sorry that sounds terribly judgmental. No need to apologize for the truth. We've got our share of all that." He leaned back on his elbows, studying the clouds. "But there's more to it. Land like this shapes people, makes them see what matters." "And what matters to you, Preston Archer?" The question was forward, but something about the open sky made convention seem distant. He considered before answering. "My ranch, family, building something that lasts." He met her eyes. "Learning, growing, not being the same man tomorrow that I am today." His words resonated deeply with Penelope, echoing her own unspoken desires for transformation. "What brought you out here originally?" she asked. "War," he said simply. "After Appomattox, I couldn't go back to Virginia. Too many ghosts. Came west with nothing but my horse and the clothes I wore." The Civil War had ended 11 years earlier, but Penelope saw how it still shadowed his eyes. "You fought for the Confederacy." "Fought for Virginia," he corrected. "Never owned slaves, never believed in the cause." "But when your home's threatened," he shrugged, "doesn't matter now, that life's gone. Yet you've built a new one, tried to." His gaze drifted to the distant mountains. "Ranch is doing well enough, got good men working for me, but sometimes I wonder if I'm just hiding out here." His candor surprised and touched her. "I think we're all hiding from something in our way." Preston turned to her, curiosity evident. "And what are you hiding from, Penelope Kincaid?" She should have deflected the question, maintained proper distance. Instead, she found herself telling him about Thomas Everett, the broken engagement, the humiliation of discovering his affair with her cousin. "So I came west," she finished, "where no one knows my shame." "Sounds to me like the shame belongs to him," Preston said, his voice hardening. "Man who'd betray a woman like you doesn't deserve a second thought." "A woman like me," she echoed, his gaze softened. "Intelligent, kind, brave enough to travel across the country alone. You hardly know me." "I'm a good judge of character," he said. "Have to be in cattle country." They fell silent, listening to the creek's gentle murmuring. Penelope felt oddly peaceful, despite having revealed more to this near stranger than she had to anyone since leaving Boston. As the sun began to sink toward the mountains, Preston reluctantly suggested they return to town. "We should get you settled in your quarters. School starts day after tomorrow." That evening, after Preston had helped move her belongings into the schoolhouse rooms, Penelope found herself alone for the first time since arriving in Prosperity Creek. She unpacked her books, arranged her modest belongings, and tried to imagine the life she would build here, Her thoughts kept returning to Preston Archer. His courtesy, his unexpected depth, the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled. It was foolish to feel such a connection after just one day, yet she couldn't deny its presence. "Focus on your position," she told herself firmly. "You came here to teach, not to moon over the first kind man you met." The following day, she dedicated herself to preparing the schoolroom, organizing books and planning lessons. Several children peered curiously through the windows, but she pretended not to notice, allowing them their reconnaissance. When a knock sounded on the door late in the afternoon, she half expected, half hoped it would be Preston. Instead, she found a slender woman with familiar blue eyes. "Miss Kincaid, I'm Patsy Archer, Preston's sister." The young woman, perhaps 22 or 3, held out a covered basket. "Brought you some supper and thought I might answer any questions about the pupils." Penelope welcomed her gladly. Over a simple meal of fried chicken and biscuits, Patsy provided insights about each child who struggled with reading, who excelled at figures, which families valued education, and which considered it a waste of time. "Your brother mentioned you've been teaching when needed," Penelope said. Patsy nodded. "I'm no trained teacher, but I can manage basic lessons. Preston insisted I get as much education as possible, sent me to a ladies' academy in Denver for 2 years. That was generous of him. He sacrificed for it," Patsy said, her affection for her brother evident. "Worked himself half to death while I was gone. Preston believes education changes lives. Our pa could barely sign his name and our ma died before I really knew her. Preston seems unusual for a rancher," Penelope ventured. A knowing smile curved Patsy's lips. "He certainly is. Reads more than most men out here, thinks deeply about everything, too deeply sometimes." She hesitated. "He mentioned showing you around yesterday. Did you enjoy it?" "Very much," Penelope admitted. "He was most helpful." "Good." Patsy began gathering her things. "Preston doesn't take to many people, keeps to himself mostly, but he spoke highly of you." The comment warmed Penelope unexpectedly. "That's kind of him." At the door, Patsy turned back. "There's a social at the church Saturday evening. Welcome for the new teacher. Nothing fancy, but it would mean a lot if you came." "Of course I'll attend." "Good. Preston will be pleased." With a knowing smile, Patsy departed, leaving Penelope to wonder just how much the young woman had guessed about her emerging feelings. School began the next morning with 23 pupils of varying ages and abilities. Despite her nervous anticipation, Penelope found herself thoroughly enjoying the challenge. These frontier children were different from her Boston pupils, more practical, less concerned with social niceties, but eager to learn in their own way. By Friday afternoon, she'd established routines, assessed abilities, and begun to connect with her charges. When school dismissed, she was surprised to find Preston waiting outside, leaning against a fence post. "Thought you might like to see my ranch," he said without preamble. "Tomorrow's Saturday, no school." Several older girls giggled as they passed, clearly noting the handsome rancher's interest in their teacher. "I would enjoy that," Penelope replied, ignoring the girls' whispers. "What time should I be ready? I'll come by at 9 if that suits." His eyes crinkled at the corners. "Bring a hat. Sun gets mighty strong." The Archer Ranch lay 7 miles from town, nestled in a broad valley with mountains rising beyond. As Preston guided the wagon up the long drive, Penelope took in the sprawling main house, bunkhouse, barn, and corrals. It wasn't as grand as some eastern estates, but there was a solid permanence to it that impressed her. "You've built all this yourself?" she asked. "Started with just the small cabin there." He pointed to a structure now used for storage. "Added on as I could afford to. Most recent part is only 2 years old." He showed her around the property with evident pride: the vegetable garden, the orchards he'd started, the well-tended fields. Cattle grazed on distant hillsides and horses watched curiously from their paddock. "It's magnificent," she said sincerely. "You should be very proud." A blush crept up his neck. "It's a living, nothing grand, but it's yours. You've created something lasting." In the barn, Preston introduced her to his favorite horse, a magnificent black stallion named Dante. "Literary reference?" she asked, stroking the animal's velvety nose. "First book I read cover to cover," he admitted. "Found a copy of Inferno in a soldier's pack during the war. Couldn't understand half of it, but it opened something in me." After the tour, they settled on the ranch house porch with lemonade. The view stretched for miles: rolling grasslands, timber-covered hills, the distant blue mountains. "I can see why you love it here," Penelope said. "There's a freedom to it." "Freedom comes with responsibility," Preston replied. "Land demands care, animals need tending, men need leadership." He glanced at her. "How are you finding the school?" "Wonderful, actually. The children are eager to learn for the most part. Some need more convincing than others." "The Tillman boys giving you trouble," he guessed. She laughed. "They tested me, certainly. But I think we've reached an understanding. Already managing the toughest cases. You're a natural teacher." "I hope so. It's all I've ever wanted to be." They talked easily through the afternoon. Preston told stories of establishing his ranch, the hard years, the gradual success. Penelope shared tales of her Boston childhood, her education, her dreams. As the sun began to sink toward the mountains, Preston cleared his throat. "I should get you back to town. The socials tonight." The church social proved to be a lively affair. Lanterns hung from posts around the churchyard. Tables groaned with food contributed by every family, and a small band of local musicians played spirited tunes. Penelope found herself welcomed warmly by most of the community, introduced to countless people whose names she struggled to remember. Throughout the evening, she was aware of Preston's presence, though he kept a respectful distance, chatting with other ranchers and farmers. Occasionally, their eyes would meet across the gathering, and a silent communication seemed to pass between them. "He's never looked at anyone the way he looks at you," Patsy whispered when they found themselves beside the punch bowl. "Not even Sarah Miller, and everyone thought he'd marry her 2 years ago." "We've only just met," Penelope protested. "I'm sure you're imagining things." "Am I?" Patsy smiled. "Preston doesn't offer ranch tours to just anyone. That place is his sanctuary." When the musicians struck up a waltz, Penelope found herself approached by several would-be partners: the young bank clerk, a shopkeeper's son, even the elderly widower who ran the newspaper. She danced politely with each, all the while conscious of Preston standing at the edge of the makeshift dance floor. Finally, as the evening grew late, he approached her. "May I have this dance, Miss Kincaid?" His formality was belied by the warmth in his eyes. "You may, Mr. Archer," she replied, equally formal. His hand at her waist was steady, his steps surprisingly graceful for a man who spent his days on horseback. "You dance well for a rancher," she observed. "My mother insisted on lessons before she died. Said no son of hers would stumble around a dance floor like a newborn calf. She would be proud of the result." As they circled the floor, Penelope became increasingly aware of glances from the townspeople. Some approving, some curious, some like Mrs. Hollister's decidedly disapproving. "We're causing talk," she murmured. "People always talk," he replied. "Nature of small towns. I should be careful of my reputation as the teacher. You're dancing at a church social, not running naked through town." His unexpected comment made her laugh despite herself. "Besides," he continued more seriously, "your reputation will stand on your work with the children, not on who you dance with." The weeks that followed settled into a pleasant rhythm. Penelope found her stride as a teacher, gradually winning over even the most reluctant pupils. She became a familiar figure in town, exchanging greetings with shopkeepers, visiting parents, attending church services. Preston rode into town 2 or 3 times a week, often timing his visits to coincide with the end of the school day. Sometimes he brought small gifts, a book he thought she'd enjoy, fresh apples from his orchard, wildflowers gathered along the trail. They would walk together through town or along the creek, talking about everything and nothing. Rumors inevitably circulated. Some found their friendship charming. Others considered it improper. Penelope tried to maintain professional distance, aware of her position's responsibilities, yet she couldn't deny her growing feelings for the thoughtful rancher. In late October, as golden aspen leaves drifted down and the first hint of winter sharpened the air, Preston invited her to Sunday dinner at his ranch. "Patsy will be there," he assured her, "along with my foreman and his wife, all perfectly proper." The gathering proved enjoyable, with Patsy and the foreman's wife, Martha, making Penelope feel welcome. After the meal, while the others remained inside, Preston suggested a short walk. "Winter will be here soon," he said as they strolled toward a hilltop overlooking the ranch. "First snow usually comes by mid-November." "The children have already warned me about blizzards," Penelope replied. "They seem quite eager for snow days." Preston chuckled. "Some things are the same everywhere, I suppose." He hesitated, then asked, "Will you stay through winter?" "Some teachers find it too harsh." "I've signed a year's contract," she reminded him. "Besides, I'm enjoying myself too much to leave." Relief crossed his features. "I'm glad to hear it." At the hilltop, they paused to admire the view, the ranch buildings below, pastures stretching to the horizon, mountains turning purple in the late afternoon light. "I come here often," Preston said quietly, "to think, to remember why I do what I do." "It's beautiful," Penelope breathed. "Yes." But he was looking at her, not the landscape. The intensity in his gaze made her heart quicken. "Preston, I know it's soon," he said quickly. "We've known each other barely 2 months, but I've never felt this way about anyone, Penelope." She should have reminded him of propriety, of her position, of the countless reasons to proceed cautiously. Instead, she found herself saying, "Nor I." His smile was like sunrise. Slowly, giving her every chance to withdraw, he leaned closer. When his lips touched hers, gentle and questioning, Penelope knew with startling clarity that her life had changed irrevocably. The kiss remained chaste, but its significance overwhelmed her. When they separated, both were breathing quickly, despite the simplicity of the contact. "I should apologize," Preston said, though he looked anything but sorry. "But I can't bring myself to regret it." "Nor can I," she admitted, touching her fingers to her lips. They returned to the house in silence, both processing what had happened. Though nothing in their external behavior revealed the moment they'd shared, Patsy gave them a knowing look as they rejoined the group. That night, alone in her schoolhouse quarters, Penelope tried to make sense of her feelings. She'd come west to escape heartbreak, not to risk it again. Yet Preston was nothing like Thomas. Where Thomas had been polished and glib, Preston was authentic and thoughtful. Where Thomas had hidden his true nature beneath charm, Preston wore his character plainly for all to see. November brought the first snow, transforming Prosperity Creek into a wonderland of white. The children arrived at school with red cheeks and excitement, tracking puddles across the wooden floor. Penelope found herself watching the window more often, hoping to glimpse Preston's familiar figure approaching through the swirling flakes. When he didn't appear for nearly a week, she tried to quell her disappointment. He had a ranch to run, after all, and winter brought its own demands. On Friday afternoon, as she dismissed the pupils into a fresh snowfall, she spotted him waiting outside, his horse stamping impatiently beside him. "I thought perhaps you'd forgotten the way to town," she teased as the last child disappeared down the street. "Been busy with winter preparations," he explained. "Cattle needed moving to sheltered pastures, hay stores secured." He stomped snow from his boots. "May I come in? There's something I'd like to discuss." Inside the schoolhouse, Preston removed his hat, turning it nervously in his hands. "I've been thinking about us, Penelope," her heart fluttered. "As have I. I know it's fast, perhaps too fast, but I've never been more certain of anything." He took a deep breath. "I love you. I want to court you properly, with the intention of marriage if you'll have me." Joy bubbled through her, unexpected and overwhelming. "Yes," she said simply. "Yes to all of it," his face lit with happiness. "Truly, truly." She stepped closer. "I love you too, Preston. It makes no logical sense we've known each other such a short time, but I'm certain of it." When he kissed her this time, there was no hesitation, only a deep certainty that bound them together despite their different worlds. They agreed to a proper courtship, mindful of Penelope's position. Preston would call on her regularly, they would attend community events together, and they would wait until spring to announce any formal engagement. Winter deepened around Prosperity Creek. Heavy snows sometimes made travel between town and the Archer Ranch difficult, but Preston faithfully appeared whenever the trails were passable. On Christmas Eve, he presented Penelope with a small wooden box. "It's not much," he said as she opened it to reveal a delicate silver locket. "But it was my mother's." Inside was a tiny photograph of Preston and Patsy as children, their solemn faces a stark contrast to the joy they now brought to her life. "It's perfect," she whispered, tears pricking her eyes. By February, their courtship was the talk of the town, though most reactions were positive. Penelope had proven herself a dedicated teacher, and Preston was respected throughout the community. Even Mrs. Hollister had softened, especially after Penelope helped her grandson overcome his reading difficulties. Spring arrived with a rush of wildflowers and new beginnings. As the school term neared its end, Penelope and Preston began planning their future. They would marry in June, after school closed for the summer. She would continue teaching, Preston insisted on it, knowing her passion for education, but would live at the ranch, riding to town each day. "We could build a small school at the ranch eventually," Preston suggested one evening as they walked along the now flowing creek. "For our children and the ranch hands' families." "Our children," Penelope echoed, the phrase filling her with warmth. "I like the sound of that. So do I." He squeezed her hand. "I never thought I'd find someone like you, Penelope, especially not when I was just trying to mend a shirt." She laughed at the memory. "Your hands were shaking so badly, I thought perhaps you were ill." "Just exhausted," he admitted. "And nervous, truth be told. There was this beautiful woman watching me make a fool of myself." "I thought you were handsome even then," she confessed, "despite your terrible sewing skills." On their wedding day in late June, the entire town gathered at the small church. Patsy served as maid of honor, while Preston's foreman stood as best man. Penelope wore a simple white dress with wildflowers in her hair, looking, as Preston whispered when he first saw her, like a dream I never dared to have. They exchanged vows beneath an archway of roses, their words clear and certain in the hushed church. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Preston kissed her with such tenderness that several women in the congregation dabbed at their eyes. The celebration afterward lasted well into the evening, with dancing, feasting, and well wishes from everyone in Prosperity Creek. As the sun began to set, Preston led his bride to the waiting wagon, decorated with ribbons and flowers by his ranch hands. "Ready to go home, Mrs. Archer?" he asked, helping her up to the seat. "Home," she repeated, savoring the word. "Yes, I believe I am." As they drove away from town, Penelope leaned against her husband's shoulder. Behind them lay the schoolhouse where she'd built a new life. Ahead stretched the road to the ranch they would share. The Wyoming landscape unfolded around them, vast and beautiful in the golden evening light. "No regrets?" Preston asked softly. "About leaving Boston? Coming west?" Penelope thought about the journey that had brought her here, the heartbreak, the fear, the leap of faith. And then that rainy night when she'd found a cowboy trying to mend a shirt and taken the needle from his shaking hands. "Not a single one," she said, and kissed him as the first stars appeared in the darkening sky.